Hello and welcome to the Nittany Gritty, brought to you by the good folks at Beyond the Big Ten. I am John Sauber of the Center Daily Times. He is men's basketball legend at Penn State, Tim Frazier. And Tim, I just have a bad feeling, and not even a bad feeling, but a feeling that I'm going to be working later into March than I think we thought like a month ago.
Yeah, but don't throw me under the bus. I thought that was your choice. That was your thought process. I thought the
you
team
backed
had
me up a little bit.
A little bit. But the team is they proved us wrong. I think you got to give credit. We will start the show off, and let's give credit to Coach Rhoades. I think he deserves it. And you talk about the coaching that he's done in this last month or so, especially these last couple of weeks. And we talk about how they started, very, very poorly, bad losses, and 4 losses in a row early, and they turn around and get 3 wins in a row these past 2 weeks, and obviously tough one in Northwestern yesterday.
Yeah, and like they were really close to flipping that Northwestern game to a win. And if that happens, like we go from talking about me working some Penn State home games in the NIT to me traveling to some NCAA tournament games real quick because, that changes everything. But yeah, they're in a spot that, and I know we talked about this a little bit last week, that I don't know that I could have imagined them being in a month ago, right? Like it looked like, we were talking about like, is the system going to work the way that we thought it would in the Big Ten? Are they going to have to be more sporadic with the pressing? Is it, you know what I mean? What does this mean for the state of the roster next year? Like we started having those conversations, and I think we were justified in doing so because of how it looked. But this looks like a totally different team, and I think one of the biggest keys, you mentioned Mike Rhoades and the job he's done. I think that's totally right.
Yeah.
They the way they deploy their lineups is both interesting and I think good, right? Like they're not. One of the biggest things I've noticed with Rhoades that a lot of basketball coaches in general are afraid to do is if he finds something that works, he will stick with it, right? Like, and the biggest example of that to me is so Kanye Clary goes out with a concussion for 2 games, misses 2 games because of a concussion, and they look more fluid offensively, right? The ball's not sticking as much. His absence kind of leads to more ball movement in general. The press is working a little bit better. So Kanye Clary, who is their leading scorer, right? This is not a 7th, 8th man who's averaging 4 points per game. This is the team's leading scorer. He comes back from that injury. He's not starting. He has not started the last 2 games. He is not necessarily playing 25, 30 minutes a game. He's not being, the focal point of the offense. And it looks like he's maybe working through, I don't want to say the struggles, but the adjustment to that a little bit. But Rhoades did not go away from what is working, right? Because I think a lot of coaches would have been like, okay, that's our leading scorer. He's got to play the same role he's always played. It's got to look exactly like that.
Yeah.
Rhoades hasn't been afraid to shift away from that. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And Clary deserves a lot of credit for at least buying into it. You know what I mean? And being willing to, he hasn't been like outwardly frustrated or anything like that on the court. I think it's a little bit clear right now that he's still blending it. We can talk a little bit more of how that manifested in the Northwestern game, but yeah, they're not afraid to stick with what works, even if it means your leading scorers coming off the bench, playing 20 minutes when it's not working. He's getting pulled like pretty much anyone else on the team would be.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we live in a world now and in sports and in life that it's either win or loss. And right now, you go on a streak where you win the 3 games in a row or the 2 in a row without Kanye, and you establish something that's working. And I would say you'd be a fool to go away from that. I understand because there are certain guys that, no matter what, they have to be able to, play their minutes and play, and no matter what, they give the team the best shot to do that. But I think at the end of the day, like you said, you have to give credit to Coach Rhoades to being able to understand, hey, this is rolling. We're going to roll with this until, we need to make another change. And I applaud him for sticking with it. I think also you said it with Kanye, well, that's a huge blow. Like I've been in a situation to where I've been starting, I've been playing minutes and then, I go down or something, or a guy comes back and I go back to the bench and you kind of looking at you like, man, why, or what happened, or why am I not in the same role that I was? And it's tough, it weighs on you, especially as a young kid, especially in college where, he's talking about, I know deep down in the back of his mind, he's thinking about his future. And you're like, hey man, I'm one of the top scorers in the Big Ten. And now, I might not have the amount of minutes or the amount of shots that I was getting at first to continue to keep that up. But I will tell him if he does listen, and you know what I mean, hopefully he does, that hey man, they're watching. If something your future and you'll be chosen, or you'll be found based on the things that you're able to adapt to different roles. Because one thing is one of the best knives to have is a Swiss Army knife, because you can use it in many different ways and not be a one trick pony. So hopefully he continues to try to blend in, find his new role. And at the end of the day, who says that his role won't come back to what it was? You know, there's a chance that it can. And then one thing I do know about the game of basketball, like when you go from playing to not playing to starting to not to 6 man to, you know, the 15 man on the bench, man. I've been in every position, but you know, the game of basketball throughout a season is a roller coaster, and it changes just like this in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for him is finding a way maybe to reach 90% of what he was before, but
Yeah.
with the other 10% being the stuff that made this successful without him, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
more distribution, less sticking on the ball. Because I do think on some level they need someone who can isolate in certain situations, right?
Yeah.
Like there will always be value in isolation scoring. It's just more about picking your spots now, right? Rather than
Yeah.
that being like, okay, when I get the ball, it's time for me to go to work, you know, in the pick and roll, and like this is how the possession goes. I think it's got to be more like, hey, you're not always going to have that matchup advantage. You got to be willing to move the ball along and have it be part of the offense. And I think that was one thing I really noticed against Northwestern, right? Like, was it
Yeah.
felt like maybe he didn't have a good feel for what it's supposed to look like right now. Like I remember there was a possession where he went and kind of forced up a layup, which is something that we had seen before. And then, you know, 5 possessions later, the lane is open for him to get to that floater range where he's been
And he
really
didn't go.
successful. And he passes it out of it. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, this is the one you should have taken, right? Like this is the
Mm-hmm.
scenario you should take that shot. And instead you pass to someone who's covered. And it's like he's trying, like he knows what he needs to be doing. It's just the process of getting to that point, I think, is going to take some time. And honestly, his skill set, I think, brings a lot of value off the bench. And I know that's tough, probably tough to hear for a guy who's the team's leading scorer and everything. But that kind of scoring punch, who maybe when he's not feeling it one night, the team isn't as dependent on it, and it allows the team to have success without that. But when he is, you
Yeah.
can go to more of those isolations, more of those pick and rolls
Yeah.
where he's the guy, and you can have him carry you to a win or two. Because especially, you know, they get to, you know, potentially the NIT, which is I think what we're looking at is maybe not the most likely outcome right now, but like a very reasonable outcome.
Possible.
Uh,
Mm.
I think that would be helpful in the postseason to have a guy like that who can go do those things. But I think you're right. And you mentioned like being in those situations. From your perspective, what is it like in the locker room when that happens? Because I'm sure there's some sense of
Mm.
like people are afraid to talk to you a little bit, right? Because you're going through something, but also you kind of might need those guys to be there for you and help you work through this. Like, what was that experience like for you when you went from having that role to it's not what you expected to be when you come back?
I think again, I think a lot of it, even outside of what the teammates may say, you kind of have to do an inner look in yourself and look in your mirror and understand what the end goal is in this. You have to take your I hate to say selfishness, but take away your own pride and hey, I want to play well, I want to do this, and realize that in order for you to achieve and be where you want to be to get to the next level, or continue to, you know, be a starter, or continue to be, you know, 6 man or whatever, just, or even to just get minutes. I was in that position that I had to do what was best for the team. And that was something that you had to flip that switch. Like, you know what I mean? So if it went from starting the pen to 40 minutes a game, or if it went from being the scorer, or if it went to the 6 man, or it was like, or, hey, I'm only in the game just to play defense. And that was just it. So I had to flip that and understand that, hey, I know I am capable. Like a Kanye is capable of going to get 18 every night. You know, that, you know, you can see it. He's been doing that throughout this season, that he's capable of doing that. But now that is, hey, in order for our team to win, is that necessary? And there are going to be games that are necessary for him to do that. But I just think right now with the team rolling and guys is, you know, stepping up, and the Kern, everybody stepping up, that it's not needed at this very moment. But there's going to be a time where we're going to talk. We're going to have another show. We're going to talk about this and be like, man, Kanye stepped up big time because we needed him to go out there and have this tremendous scoring night. But for me, I think a lot of it is you got to look in the mirror and look at it and say, hey, in order for my own personal success, um, you have to win. So when your team is winning, more eyes are looking at you. And that's what you have to look at. Hey, man, you know, there's a lot of scores out there on bad teams that don't win games. And they're like, oh, well, he scores on a bad team. But to have someone that's capable, that's reliable, that's a good scorer on a good team that's winning, especially right now that's trending upward. That means more, right? More that'll mean more to you being a high scorer on a bad team.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point, right? Because for as good as guys feel when they're like lighting up the Big Ten and everything, there are like three guys in every draft, if that, who go into the league and are the team's best scorer immediately. You know what I mean? Like it just
Yeah.
doesn't happen, and so
No,
you
no
already have
chance.
to adjust, whether it's in the NBA or the G League or overseas. Like you are not going to play that role right away, and so I think this could be a good like chance for self-reflection, like you said, right? Like
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
a really good chance to look in that mirror and be like, okay, maybe this isn't what I want to be, but maybe there's a way for me to make this even better than it would have been had I not missed the two games, right? Like
And
to push
and
forward and make a different situation.
and at the end of the day, like again, you talk about you coming back from an injury, when we call it a concussion, or whatever it might be, that hey,
Zach
you're
Hicks
not
did say, for what it's worth, at today's press conference that Kanye had a concussion. That's the only reason that
okay,
I felt
okay.
comfortable. We had known this before, obviously, but it wasn't out there. But yeah, that Zach Hicks mentioned it at the
but
press conference today.
you got to understand that anytime you have a setback, like you're rare, and nobody comes back and just become you hit the same step in the same stride that you were before you left. Like, so it's going to take him some time to be able to get back to that. You know what I mean? Hopefully it's sooner than later. And so hopefully he doesn't get down on himself about, hey man, I'm not able to make these certain shots, and I'm missing easy shots or floaters or layups that I usually make. Man, I'm thinking those things come. Like you know what I mean? Anytime you take days off or time off or weeks, for him it was 3 weeks, I think 2.5 weeks off. You know what I mean?
That was
Especially
a
when you
week and a
talk
half for him. Yeah, yeah.
week and a half. But I'm saying especially with concussion, because what concussion is, you have at least 3 days, 4 days of not doing anything.
Yeah.
So um it takes some time, and he'll be able to get back into the groove, and I mean, hopefully he just continues to work on his game, and which I know that Rhoades is having these guys doing, because we've seen improvement from everybody. You know what I mean? From top to bottom, a lot of these guys are stepping up in a big way, especially since he went down, sharing the load of scoring, and you have to give props to them too. I know we're talking about Kanye a lot, but I want to make sure that we give those guys a pat on the back too for being able to step up during this run.
Well, yeah, and one of the biggest things, like we can talk about Ace ad nauseum, right, and how important he's been, but
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that people maybe it's gone underappreciated, I guess, because I know that some people have not been fond of Zach Hicks as a player because some of the shots haven't fallen. You got to
Mm-hmm.
understand, like this is part of being a shooter, right? Like you just got to
Yep.
keep going. Like there is part of it is the confidence to continue to do it no matter what, and he is a good shooter. And the one thing I noticed, I actually asked both him and Mike Rhoades about this today, is the movement shooting, right? Like it's one thing to be able to
Mm-hmm.
stand still and hit a three. It's another to be able to curl off a screen. It's another to be able to shoot off the dribble. And he started to do that
Yeah.
more. He's attacking closeouts and taking 16 footers that are wide open because guys are closing out so aggressively. He may not look balanced, but he's able to gain his balance off of screens and shoot that way and be effective. And I think that's been enormous for this team, because you talk about the
Yeah.
way that kind of bends the defense. And now the defense, it's not like, there are guys like, for instance, Leo O'Boyle on the team is more of a standstill shooter, right? Like where you have to pay attention to him when he's out along the perimeter, but you don't necessarily, there's no movement involved to it, right? Like
Right.
if Zach Hicks is coming off a screen, you have to be concerned because you're not going to get
Right.
over that screen before he gets the shot off, right? Like, so you're
Right.
going to be in trouble there. And so you have to stick to him more. And I think that's opened things up for Ace. I think it's opened things up for Kern to cut. Nick Kern mentioned that today, the ability to cut, you know what I mean? The space that has been provided to him because guys are making more shots. And I think you're right. Like a lot of those guys have stepped up, but man, like seeing Hicks shoot in a way that is, like these are shots, and again, we bring him up all the time. He's not the same level of Andrew Funk, I don't think, but like it's those type of shots that we talk about that bring so much value, and Hicks is now hitting those, and that adds a ton. And he gave a lot of credit to Joe Crispin, one of the team's assistant coaches,
Mm.
like for getting him to that point, making him comfortable, and explaining to him the value of doing that, because everybody knows that Joe Crispin could shoot no matter where his feet were, right? It did not matter. He was going to be able
Yeah.
to gain balance and get his shot off and keep his form where it needed to be. But yeah, I think Hicks being able to shoot off screens is so big for this team, and actually like moving forward, like really changes the upside of how many games this team can win the rest of the way, because of
Yeah.
it's not just about him making shots, it's about how the rest of the offense looks completely different because he can do that.
Yeah, again, and which we bring up Andrew Funk. There's 2 weeks in a row for
Yeah.
about Funk, and there were games and episodes last year when we shot this and we talked about this, and we were like, man, we need Funk to step up where he went through shooting struggles, where he was 0 for 5, 0 for 6, and didn't really contribute in the scoring way. And then there was times where we talk about it in a tournament where he's playing against A&M and he's shooting lights out. So like as a shooter, it's like this. It's going to be that as a player, especially as a shooter too, because that's your job. Your job on this team is be able to make shots, and when you don't make shots, everybody's down on you. But when you do make shots, they want to put you on their shoulders. And then, right now, he's in a hot groove, and that's tremendous for this team because again, we talked about it last week about opening spacing for the floor for Ace, and now Kanye being back for him to be able to get in and be able to distribute the score as well. So man, it's definitely contributed in a major way.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how that can help Kanye too, right? Like how those driving lanes for Kanye are going to be there now that maybe they weren't before because a wing defender suddenly has to take an extra step out and try and do something about Zach Hicks that maybe they didn't have to do a month ago when Kanye was before he got the concussion. So the rest of this schedule, the way it's shaping up, like I was joking before the pod with you guys, like I don't know, like 6-1 is not impossible. I don't. It's not likely, right? Because it's just really hard to go 6-1 in the Big Ten, right? But you look just to map it out the rest of the way. Michigan State at home Wednesday night. We're recording here Monday afternoon. Like Wednesday night, like that's a tough game, but it's not like unwinnable. Ken Palm has it as a 5-point loss, which is a tighter margin than you would expect, given that Michigan State beat them by 31 on the road like a month and a half ago. And then you have Nebraska on the road. That's tough, but not completely impossible. Illinois at home in that return to rec game, like this is a stylistic thing where I think they match up well with Illinois. I wouldn't be surprised if they win that game. Beat Indiana at home, already beat Indiana on the road. I don't see why that result would change given that Indiana is like free falling in a major way. Yeah. And I'm just saying, some of us had this discussion about a month ago and already talked about that this would be coming for Indiana. Not to pat myself on the back here, but they get Iowa again on the road. They've shown they can beat Iowa, and I know it's different on the road. Minnesota is not going to overwhelm them, and then they close with Maryland at home. Like there's no, honestly, it's like Michigan State or Illinois, and Illinois are the ones that you look at and you're like, okay, like it's going to be tougher to get these. Both of those are at home, and so the road games are the matchups that they have, and they've proven already that they can win on the road somehow. Yeah, and like I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 2-5 the rest of the way. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 6-1 the rest of the way, just because this team has been inconsistent at times. But if they win enough games, they're going to maybe not put themselves on the bubble for the NCAA tournament, but there will at least have to be a discussion about, okay, if they win this many games in the Big Ten tournament, are they a bubble team now, right? And man, a month ago, I would have told you that I would be done working on like March 7th. I would be focusing on spring ball. We'd be fully into football season. And now here we are where this is on the table at the very least.
Yeah, man. Credit to these guys. They just continue to get knocked down and stand back up and fight. And this is just a fun team to watch, and especially to see that, especially with everything that they've done in the first year on the roads and first year players, a lot of them in the Big Ten and, the transfers as well. Just to see this team like come together towards the end is special. And I'm hopefully that, like you said, we have 6-7 games left. I'm hoping that they continue to keep this streak of winning games alive. And I said it last year. I say it all the time, man. The best team to be you want to be the best team at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, if you look back and you say, like you said, they won 6-1 or 5-2 or whatever it may be, 4-3. But winning those last couple games and going into the Big Ten tournament on a high note, I think it's very special for this team, and that's a win in this year's book for me.
Yeah, and I don't want to pour cold water on things, but I think I might have mentioned this last week too. I wonder how much we're going to be talking about that stretch of 5 games at the end of the year. Is like, man, if they could have just flipped 2 of them, you know what I mean? Like if they had just, not even necessarily Buck now, but like Butler and VCU were winnable games that were right there. Maryland was a winnable game that was right there.
Georgia Tech.
Yeah, Georgia Tech. You mentioned that one. That's the one I keep forgetting. Like they kind of did win that game, and then some stuff happened with that officiating at the end. Like you just look back at like if they just had 2 more, how much differently would this conversation be? Because that record then goes suddenly they're 14-10. They're still 6-7 in the Big Ten, but suddenly they're 14-10. It's like, okay, now if they go 5-2, then it's like 19-12, and that's a real discussion.
That number's looking good. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you have to wonder how, even if you just get the easy one, I guess, in Bucknell, and then the Georgia Tech one, which they kind of had, like, and this is, this is a longer discussion that needs to be had about like the committee and how they choose teams and why, like, you know what I mean? Like, does how good Penn State is really change if they just simply got a better call at that Georgia Tech? You know what I mean? Like, does that, I understand, like, it flips. You mentioned we're in a wins and losses world. Like, it flips a loss to a win, but like, does it, if they're really judging it based on how good these teams are, just 2 points in that game make that much of a difference if you like strip it all away and just look at how good they are? You know what I mean? Again, I don't want to
Yeah,
have this discussion now because it's like a very
but just
philosophical
for
deep
me, it's
discussion.
just. But I think for me, I like obviously I don't work for the committee when they talk about the tournament, but I just know if you talk about a team with 20 wins compared to 19 wins,
Right.
you
Like,
know what
it's
I mean?
crazy how like
20
that
just looks
feels so
better than
much different.
19. Right, right.
Yeah, and it's like, was it really that different? Like, because it feels
Yeah,
like the gap between 19 and 20 is bigger than the gap between like 18 and 19, when
right.
that's not true, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's one game. They're both one game, but it feels different based on how we like perceive stuff and all of that. And again, way too much philosophy for this podcast that I don't want to get
Yeah,
into, but it is interesting, right? Like, it's really interesting in how, like, because this is sports and college football is moving this way too, with how this
yeah.
is, with the playoff, they're going to be more at large bids. So there's going to be more conversations like this there too. And so, but yeah, for now, like, listen, this is a basketball team that is significantly better than it was 3 months ago, significantly better than it was 2 months ago, significantly better than it was 1 month ago. And I
Yeah.
think if you're talking about how, and we'll have a longer pod later in the year about where we talk
Hmm.
mostly about Rhoades and the job that he's done this year, but you nailed it at the top, and I think this is a good thing to talk about to close this out. Like, the job that Mike Rhoades has done is better than I thought he could do, which is a credit to him, because I thought my perception of this hire was that it was a safe hire that you make when you're like, okay, you're going to hit this baseline, right? Like, once he gets his guys in, like, can consistently make the tournament, like, once or twice every like 5 years, which for Penn State is like a you know what I mean? Like, it's not something that
Yeah.
happens, as you know. But I think like the ability to turn it around this quickly maybe has to change. It changes my perception. Maybe I'm overreacting to a small sample. Who knows? But like, I think it does change my perception somewhat of what this team can look like when it's at its best, and maybe how, this is going to sound weird, but how like mediocrity might like be the baseline now. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
that bad if you can turn it every year like this. Like, because it's really impressive. We compare it to Micah Shrewsbury's first year a lot, and like that year did not go well. And I don't, like, that's not a knock on Micah. Like, I thought he did a really good job. He just didn't have the personnel yet.
Yeah.
Mike Rhoades does not have the personnel yet either. And like, they're right now much better than I think anyone could have anticipated them being this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. I agree. Like I said from the jump, man, credit to Coach Rhoades, what he's done. I'm very proud of this team. I'm proud of the coaches. What they've done so far. Obviously, I don't want to jump ahead. We don't want them to shit the bed the rest of
I was
these
going to say,
games.
we're talking way too nice about this team, but
Yeah,
they're about
yeah.
to go like
But
0-7 down the stretch, and it's going to be our
they
fault.
can't do that. I don't see them doing that. But I mean, they have
You're
a
right. They
favorable
do play
schedule.
Indiana, so
They have a favorable schedule. I think they can pull that off. But I know you mentioned something earlier. You brought up Joe Christman. I saw something on Twitter, I want to say a couple of days ago, when they were talking about retiring jerseys. If you were retired
oh yeah,
basketball,
yeah, yeah.
you saw that, right? So I was curious. I wanted to put you on the spot. Who do you think, if they had to retire jerseys in Penn State basketball history? I know that's a long time for you. Like,
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah, yeah.
little older, but if you could pick some guys that who you think that really deserved it, and what I mean, who would you put?
So, as I always say, I'm still in the prime of my life here in my 20s, despite being 29 now after turning 29 last week. So I understand that you might be a little on the old side
Hmm.
now compared to us young folk. But no, I think there's some obvious ones, right? Like Jesse Arnell has to get retired,
Hmm.
Calvin Booth has to get retired, Joe has to get retired, yours has to get retired, Taylor's has to get retired, Lamar has to get retired, right? I think those are the ones that stand out to me as like, these are the numbers that front
But
of
what's
mind.
your
The
what's your
discussions.
criteria? What is your? But my thing for your criteria is that, because
I
there is
think it's
there's a
super
discussion in
subjective.
this. You're right.
Yeah, I think it's super subjective. But to me, those guys are ironclad, right? Like,
Hmm.
because of the things they accomplished, including yourself, and the things that you guys did to the statistical accomplishments are obviously a major part of this. But when you think of Penn State basketball, I think there's an easy way to do this when it's like, when you snap decision, like if someone says Jesse or no, yes or no, it's immediately yes, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it would be
Hmm.
tough to say no to that. Same with you, same with Lamar, same with Taylor, Joe, and same with Calvin. Like, I think there are certain guys in that group that are like, it's just easy. And I don't know that I can define it, but I just know. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are other discussions that it gets a little more difficult. Right. I would also retire Jalen Pickett's number. And I know that might be a point of contention for some people because he was only there for 2 years at Penn State. He also might end up being like, we might look back in 20 years and say that he's one of the three best players of all time at Penn State, right? Like, because it's easier to judge these things the further you get away from it. I think that's happened with you and Taylor, especially, right? Like, now that we're 10 years out from you guys playing, just to age you a little more, I think like it's now more obvious how great you both were in your time at Penn State. And I think it's easier to see that. And I think we might get like 10 years down the road and like Jalen's, I think, in the same category as you and Taylor as point guards at Penn State. But from a legacy standpoint, I understand that it's tougher because he was there for 2 years. But when you think about like brink of the Sweet 16, clear best player, All-American, like arguably the best point guard in the country last year, when you add all of that stuff together, like he was too good. Like his impact in those 2 years transcends the fact that he did spend part of his career at Siena. And I think that, you know what I mean? I understand why people would push back because of that. But to me, that's the group. And then you get into okay, but what about like Andrew Funk, who was obviously massively impactful, right? Like he had an enormous impact on that team. To me, he doesn't cross the threshold. He was there for 1 year. No matter how big that impact is, he wasn't the best player on the team, right? Like, so it's tougher to get there. I understand that argument, but to me, it's like that group of guys that you're included in, that's very obvious. And then I think pick as well, which to me is probably more obvious than it might be to other people. Now you might name some guys that I think there's a strong argument for Gary Claxton. Like I love Gary Claxton. Like I think Gary Claxton.
Trust me, there's awesome. A lot of names.
Yeah.
But I hate to cut you
Eventually
off.
Eventually going to run out of numbers too. Like that's a little bit part of this.
And some of us had the same number, I think. But I think for Pickett's defense, obviously I would have loved him to have been there for 4 years to see what he would have been able to do. But I will say this, that if you look at other schools, there are guys that are one and dones or 2 years that get their jersey retired. So if we look at the criteria of that, I think he does get it because he has the accolades and he's done what he needed to do to be able to get his jersey retired. But I do think it's harder for Penn State being a school that doesn't do it. You know what I mean? Yeah. If we have something that does do it and it's like, okay, this is the norm, but hey, Pickett came in, he was All-American, this and this and that. Man, let's retire his jersey. But when you talk about a school that doesn't do it, and now we're just having this discussion because, I was brought to it on Twitter. I think the names that you said are pretty, obviously you can't, I think there has to be some type of criteria because you don't want to have too many because like you said, then there's no numbers. Then you're like the Boston Celtics and people come in and you number 77 and 99.
Yeah, right.
But I do believe those guys that you mentioned, Taylor, Calvin Booth, Jesse Arnell, Joe, Lamar. But there's so many other Lamar, man, because I think him and Taylor are pretty much set that, all-time leading scorer. How do you not put that person retire their jersgy?
And all-time assist
leader.
Lamar. Yeah,
right, exactly. Right. For Lamar, I think everybody knows he's breaking that record. All-time assist leader.
Yeah.
Myself. But there's just so many other people because
Calvin broke like every record 4 times over with blocks. Like I forget what they all are, but he was ridiculous. The one that I'm curious about, I think there's like you mentioned like the one and dones or the two and dones, like Tony Carr, like had he finished had he gone to 4 years, I think he would have been that Lamar level player, but he didn't. And so I think it's no matter how great he was, he never reached that. Like part of it with Pickett is like he reached this level of maturity too, where he was kind of optimizing himself by the end.
And he went out on a high note.
Yeah,
he went out on a high note. So you always remember Lamar you always remember Jalen as the high note he took to the tournament.
Yeah, I don't think Tony quite achieved what he, you know what I mean? Had he stayed for 2 years, I think it would have 2 more years, he would have been to that level. But I think because he wasn't as far along and it wasn't as developed as a player, I think Penn State fans missed out on it. And we didn't see, it kind of sucks because I covered that last Lamar team, you know what I mean? And like that team was really good. And like you think about when Tony been there too, like how incredible they would have been. And not to bum Penn State fans out about like the fact that he left early, but like you think about like what could have been with the program and with that team at the end. But But is there anyone that I didn't mention that you would throw in there too? That is
Oh,
because like to me, like
I don't
there's
know
the
if I want to. I don't know if I throw
No,
in the
no, you're
jersey
doing it. Like,
retired.
listen, you made me
No,
do
because
it.
I'm not gonna throw the jersey retired because I think right now we already got too many. But I do that. But
Yeah.
I do like this discussion because it shows how many great players have come through Penn State
Yeah.
basketball, which is something that hasn't been, people don't talk about. There has been players that have come through that have had great careers. We talk of
You look
Jamel
at the last
Cornley.
15 years, like 4 of the guys we mentioned are of the last 15 years, right? And like
Right.
I think that's a good indication of where the program's heading too. Like,
Right.
by the way, I think in a year and a half we might be having this discussion about Ace. Like, I don't think it's impossible for Ace to be in this discussion by, you know what I mean? Because it's that Lamar or the Pickett trajectory,
Yeah.
right? Like it's the same thing, except he's kind of been better in year one. Now the start was not ideal,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm sure he would tell you that after he got benched for some stuff, but like he's better right now than Jalen was at this point in his first year. Now Jalen took off in the off season, right, and became like elite of the elite in college basketball. I don't know that Ace is going to do that, but if there's a leap in there, like we might be having this discussion again in a year.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure I don't forget those names. And Jamel, these are names that I know personally.
Yeah, Jamel was another guy that I grew up on.
Jamel Cornley, DJ Newbill.
DJ
was phenomenal when he was there. Those are the two I really wanted to hit. And we said Joe. No Nick Colella. He was my guy, my roommate, but Nick.
Listen,
Nick
that one was just for you. I said that just for you. You can send him this clip too.
I am. He probably watching it. There's some other guy. Damn, I had it on the tip of my head and you cut me off.
No, that's my bad. I mean, Jeff Brooks was really good when he was there, but I don't think like that reaches the level.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Andrew Jones was really good. Like there's some guy. Trust me, if you want to play the just name some dudes game, I can go back with Penn State basketball further.
Yeah, but I think too. I think a lot of it you have to look like I want to know what the crowd. I wish we jump on them with the other podcasts and those guys have I know Ohio State has jersey retired. Those guys that have guys jersey retired. Obviously their criteria might be a little steeper than ours because you're talking about All-Americans and National Player of the Years. But for us, I think there has to be some type of criteria of, I do believe you have to be there at least 2 years because our school is not built for one and done.
It's not a one and done thing.
You have to be there at least 2. I saw someone, the big fella that just left. Everybody, he was, the face of the team, face of the school.
Jon Hara.
John. Which is another one.
Thing, like,
it was a fan favorite.
About,
so,
right. Like this is where it gets tough to like put a definition on it. And I think you just kind of have to call it the, it when you see it thing. Cause John had, and John was always great to interact with. Great first name, first off, elite of the elite in that regard, despite him having an H in there. But I think that is like, that's the level of the impact was more than just on the court, right? Like to keep it together culturally across coaches, like was enormous. Pete Lasicki, another guy we didn't mention. I am cheating now by looking at the list of leading scorers all time. But no, like I think there are guys like that you look at, and that's why it's like with John, it's not necessarily. I mean, he was good on the court, but I think his impact off the court is more important than that, right? Like, there are guys like that this applies to, where I think he would be a no doubter. Actually, you know what I mean, just because of that.
Yeah,
impact. And yeah,
well, you would put John. You would put him as a non doubter, have his jersey retired.
You don't achieve 20.
I'm not hold on. I'm not knocking him saying that he doesn't deserve it. I just want you to say it that you believe that.
Let me preface it with this. First off, if you're sending Colella that clip, I'm sending John this clip.
I'm not sending Colella the clip. He better watch it on his own. Like subscribe, hit the sub.
That's right. If you don't get that. You don't get that 22-23 season without John Hara holding it together in the seasons
100%.
prior to that, right? And I
100%.
I think from an impact standpoint, yes, I would retire John Hara's number. And I think that might sound insane to some people. But I also think like you have to, like, that's part of the when you see it thing, right? Like you have to understand and be around the program to have known that impact and the impact he had.
Again, there's so many great names we can go down the list because, I think a lot of it is too that teams had go-to guys. Every year you can go to where somebody, or every 4 years there was a guy that was a go-to guy, which is tremendous. I
think DJ is a perfect example of that too.
Right. You know what I'm saying? So like I'm putting DJ before I put Mike Watkins. I would be okay with that. But I think the names that do make it, they would have to be very deserving and being there.
Dude,
and I think the
I'm almost
only
yelling at you
people
just
that
now.
hold on.
You would
Only people
absolutely make it. That is insane.
I'm just saying if I didn't, but for me, the people that I would put that I didn't, I think there's 4 names. I think it's Calvin, Jesse Arnell.
Yeah,
And
those
I'm
are the 2
putting
easiest ones to me.
Taylor, and I'm putting
I think you're 4th.
Lamar. I'm just saying, other than me, that's my 4 names. And there's no knock to Joe. There's no knock to Pickett. There's no knock to John, and none of those guys. But I think those 4, in my eyes, are, you talk about 2 of the leading scorers, and Lamar and Taylor, and you talk about Jesse Arnell and Calvin Booth doing some crazy stuff that they were doing back then. We didn't even have video. You know what I mean? So
Calvin,
like those 2.
Listen, man, Calvin Booth played the late 90s.
But I'm just and I look at it too. Like after that, they're professional careers, man. I know this is a college thing, but when you see someone, because like I mentioned earlier, there's players that play well on bad teams and they just stack up points. But players that are real players do that at a high level and continue to do that. So that's how I look at it too. Like, and that's why I'm looking at the Lamar and Taylor, because there's, even though Taylor didn't have an NBA career, but he was professional for a while, and he was his college was just insane.
It was
just what he did, right? So his college was just insane. Calvin's professional career was still insane. Jesse as well. Like for me, that's how I look at it. Like those 4 right there is I'm putting that on there, and then after that, the 5th is up for debate between myself.
Tim, you also played in the NBA.
Again, I think that's a criteria. That's a criteria. You know what I mean? I think other than who had the long, I think Calvin has the longest, and then it's me.
Yeah, and Calvin is like still a GM and just won the NBA title last
championship,
year.
Right. So I think it's Calvin, and then after me, it's me.
Too.
Yeah. Right. And I think it just impact on the school as well. Like, so, and that's not a knock to those other guys, because again, I'm not even putting myself. I'm putting those 4 for sure.
Listen, I appreciate your humility. But
I get what you're saying, John. But I'm being serious, bro.
I know you are, but you're wrong.
Because you can't.
You are in that group.
Okay. Because you can't put. Let me say this. Because you can't not put the 2 leading scorers on the team. Because we talk about 2,000 careers, and we talking about guys that did that at Penn State. You know what I mean? They scored all their buckets at Penn State. So those 2 guarantee in my book.
But like with John, I still stand by that. The cultural impact was so enormous. Like the stuff with, like,
I wasn't there, so I can't tell you
that's the
about
thing.
his culture. But what I've heard he kept those teams together.
Everything
and
together.
he was the most leader. You know what I mean? Again, on a leader with guys that were pros.
Right. And the stuff that coaches said about him, like the way that Micah Shrewsbury talked about John Hara, the way that every coach that coached him talked about John Hara and his leadership, I think is like that's, it does transcend the basketball. And like, he was good. Like this was not like, you know what I mean? This is a 7th man or anything. Yeah. He was one of the best rebounders in program history. He couldn't shoot any better than I if he tried, and I hope that he sees this part because he would agree with this. I've made that joke to him several times.
One thing, hold on, before I forget this, John. I love John. I love him as a player when he was there, and just his what he even do. I think now he started the TBT team, so like he's still part of the Penn State. But was he an All-American, or was he
nope.
First team All Big Ten, second team? Third team. I know you got your computer up, so
yeah. Let me. This is the part of the podcast where I just like try and talk through the fact that I'm googling things right now, which honestly, like I've gotten much better at over the years, but I'm not doing it quick enough right now. I don't think I'm fairly confident he never made first team All Big Ten. He was honorable mention, which feels kind of wild. That he did win the sportsmanship award twice, which does definitely fit the John Hara ethos of like who he is as a person.
He should be a Penn State coach later on down the road.
Oh yeah, and if he wants
after Rhoades decides to retire, then yeah.
But no, I don't believe. So he was All Big Ten twice, and he was honorable mention for both, which feels like
what was he All Big Ten? He was second team.
Honorable mention. He wasn't even second team.
Oh, honorable mention.
But yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like, if you strip away the cultural standpoint, if you want to make this strictly an on-court thing, then no, he's not.
No. I think all of it.
I'm saying when I say you,
I
don't mean I don't
Oh,
mean you. I mean in general. If someone wanted to make this only on court, then I don't think he qualifies. But I think the impact of that is enough to cross that
yeah.
threshold. I do think there are the five easy ones are really obvious. So you mentioned them, and yes, you are in that group. No matter how humble you're going to
I
be
ain't
about
scored
this,
enough points, man.
dog. You
Because at the
finished
end of the day,
first in assists. Do you want me to read your resume on the podcast? Is that what
no,
you want me
please
to do?
don't. Please, no. Please don't.
I can
Please
do that
don't.
if you want me to. I
No,
can pull
no.
your
But
Wikipedia page up real
I
quick.
did. I did. I enjoyed my time at Penn State. It was one of the best decisions that I made, basketball wise, life wise, school wise as well, academics wise. So, I enjoyed it, and I reaped it, fruits of the labor. Professional
Yeah.
career, still playing. So, like, I have nothing but good things to say about the program and what it's done for me and what I was able to achieve for it.
And that's
But I
why
just want to bring that
if
up. I know we've had a longer podcast this time, but you keep trying to read my stats. So we've had a longer podcast
listen.
this time, but I'm glad that we're able to do that because I wanted to talk about it because I
Yeah.
saw it on here and names were being thrown out there, and I just wanted to make sure we talked about it and we gave credit to all those players
Oh
that
yeah.
names weren't brought up there because they were phenomenal, man.
Gary Claxton, I think, is the
saw.
most
Oh my
underrated
God,
Penn
yeah,
State basketball player of all time. That's like, so I grew up watching Geary play, and like that is like, who knows, maybe we'll have him on the pod sometime to talk about it. But that's like when I
yeah,
was like 10 years old. I've told the story before. I fell in love with basketball, like watching the Villanova teams, like the Mike Nardi, Alan
yeah,
Ray, Randy Foy, Kyle Lowry team. But like Penn State was the local school for me, so I would go watch them play, and like Geary was the first like guy, you know what I mean,
yeah.
that I like was like, oh man, he's really good, like him and Jamel. But yeah, like this is, I think it's it's a worthwhile discussion. Maybe we'll resume it later we'll toss
Yeah.
some names around. Maybe I'll do a little more research beforehand so I don't get trolled by you in the middle of the podcast for making some suggestions. But
That Mike
you mentioned
Watches
all
is
the
crazy.
things. Listen, you mentioned all the nice things that
Mike,
going to
I
Penn
love you,
State
bro,
did
but
for
that was
you.
crazy.
The all the things that going to Penn State did for you, the most important was it led to you being on this podcast, which you can listen to every week. It's the Nittany Gritty. You can find us on YouTube, brought to you, like I said, by the good folks at Beyond the Big Ten. We're on Apple Podcasts. You can find Tim on Twitter at TimPhrase23. You can find me at John Sauber. I think we have run this bad boy into the ground. And honestly, there's a decent shot this discussion continues as soon as we stop recording anyways. So we
Yeah.
will do that now. And until next time, I'll talk to you later.